Welcome to the channel where we talk about your work, your wealth, and how to position yourself as an expert. Yesterday I shared with you 3 thought proposals for how you can have a prosperous year ahead. Then I also promised you that I'd be sharing 3 politically correct ideas that I believe you need to ditch this year in order to aim your thinking in the correct direction. Now, the danger for me here is that I go on and on this one. So I've promised myself I'm going to do my very best to give you the stripped down, abbreviated, nuts and bolts Reader's Digest version and not provide you with a long lecture. So let's see if I can be true to my word and do this efficiently. Idea number 1, drop the word privilege. What do I mean by that? Well, you have to be a real dyed-in-the-wool nerd to have such a thing as a favorite economist. I do. Mine is Thomas Sowell. The man is my hero. And he points out that there is something unethical, bordering on evil, in using the term privilege as a synonym for accomplishment. And he uses the example of the Irish and Jewish immigrants into the United States over the course of the last century. Over the course of the better part of 100 years, in both cases, they went from extreme poverty to being among the wealthiest people on earth as a result of their participation in the US economy. Sowell then points out articles that describe these 2 demographics as the most privileged in America. And he says there is something very suspect about looking at a group of people who have worked hard, sent their kids to school, built their own businesses, and become wealthy, and calling them privileged. He says the terminology is not just wrong, but it is malicious. I agree. As you construct the worldview that helps you to build your business and build your wealth, I propose that we ditch the word privilege when, in fact, we are talking about accomplishments. What about intergenerational privilege? Well, that's an interesting argument. People come back and they say, yes, but your children didn't earn that. My response to that is, you are vilifying the most beautiful thing that human beings do. We raise our children well, we help them, we assist them to go further than we did. We pass on what we know to the next generation. To vilify that is to do something fundamentally anti-human. They are not evil benefactors of a privileged system. They are part of a community of people who raise their children. That's beautiful, not evil. Idea number 2. I propose that we drop the vilification of cultural appropriation. Have you come across the term before? It's basically the idea of one culture borrowing from another, and it's become very politically incorrect to do that. Ooh, you can't touch their culture, that's sacrosanct. It's nonsense, let me tell you why. The most successful cultures around the world have been chronic borrowers. And once again, you have to ask the moral question, what's wrong with learning from each other? It is what we do. In my upcoming book, Poverty Proof for Entrepreneurs, I talk about this idea of access to a universe of ideas and how some of the most economically successful cultures simply borrowed from others. Great Britain at the time of its zenith was a perfect example of this. It had Roman Dutch law, it had an amalgamation of languages from around the world. It built its fleet of ships using the best of Spanish rudders and the best of French innovation, and it simply looked for the best ideas around the world and incorporated them. It worked, and they became the global superpower that they were about a century ago. Now, by contrast, during what we call the Middle Ages, China was technologically way superior to Europe. But in 1433, their emperor made a decision that set them back by half a millennium. The decision was that there was nothing to learn from the outside world, that China should be kept culturally insular, and that there was enough knowledge, enough technology, enough culture, enough progress within that space that they didn't need to interact with the rest of the world. Now, if you know your history, you might know that by that stage, China had done much more exploring than Europe had ever done. They had more advanced fleets, they had more advanced technology, but that was where it stopped. And it stopped there for a number of centuries because they denied themselves cultural appropriation. It's become very politically correct to say, oh no, you can't borrow from other people. It's nonsense, it needs to be stamped out. We are the human race, we share ideas, it's one of the best things we do. As an entrepreneur, that matters to you as well. You will face a series of problems that you need to solve and resolve as you build your brand and your business. I encourage you to open yourself to the universe of ideas rather than to remain insular and stuck in an ever-decreasing thought swamp. There's a universe of ideas available. Let's share them freely. That's what we do. And idea number 3. We need to ditch the narrative that says solving poverty and solving inequality are the same thing. They are not. Over the course of the past decade, as I mentioned in yesterday's video, extreme poverty has been cut in half. Now that also puts paid to the idea that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. It is simply, demonstrably, numerically false. It is not true. What's actually happening is that the rich are getting richer at a faster pace. But the poor are getting richer as well, and that matters. That is important from a humanitarian perspective. We stop that from happening if we insist on equality. Why? Because it is the growth out of poverty that actually matters. If you insist on equality, you prevent that natural intrinsic growth. I make an argument that would take me about an hour or the space of a book that equality is one of the most dangerous ideas we've ever had. The egalitarian mindset stops a lot of progress. Now let me just qualify that very quickly. Equality of human rights is incredibly important. Equality before the law is terrifically important. Equality of outcomes is not. That has the seeds of communism in it. That keeps people poor. So, this is a long and complex argument, but the heart and soul of it, the very quick version is, if we want to help people out of poverty, then inequality is not the thing to resolve. In a free market system that helps half of people out of poverty in the span of 10 years, you will get unequal results. That's okay. If we're talking about inequality before the law, certainly the law needs reform, but not the capitalism that led to that. That helps people out of poverty. That's a good thing. Certainly that argument needs a little more space, and I've actually tried my hand at writing an entire book around that principle, the idea that egalitarianism and the equality idea have been the most murderous ideas we have ever had. But that's the very quick version. So this year, as you construct your mindscape and your belief system, does that make sense to you? Could you drop those 3 politically correct ideas? I hope so. It's important to you, and it's important to humanity. The goal is to lift people out of poverty, and it is working spectacularly. When we impose a single, same limit and say everyone must have the same outcomes, suddenly we stop lifting people out of poverty. That's dangerous. If I haven't offended you beyond repair, make sure that you subscribe and come back tomorrow for more ideas and insights on how you can go from amateur to expert.